Lieutenant Sarah Chun stood at the tactical display, her finger tracing the convoy route through the mountainous terrain. The morning briefing had reached its critical phase, with field commanders from 3 different units crowding around the holographic map. She had spent the previous night analyzing satellite imagery and intelligence reports, identifying a pattern that everyone else had missed. Commander Richards stormed into the briefing room, his heavy boots announcing his presence before his voice did. The room fell silent as he surveyed the gathered officers, his gaze stopping coldly on Sarah. She had been explaining her findings about insurgent movement patterns when he arrived, but now every head turned toward the commanding officer. The convoy route they were discussing would take supply vehicles through Devil's Canyon, a narrow pass that had seen 3 attacks in the past month. Sarah had discovered something crucial in the intelligence data. The attacks weren't random. They followed a precise timing pattern that suggested coordination with someone who had access to convoy schedules. Commander Richards pushed his way to the front of the group, shouldering past 2 captains who stepped aside respectfully. His eyes locked on Sarah with obvious irritation. She had been in the middle of presenting her analysis when he entered, and now she waited for permission to continue. You know what? Let me ask you something before we dive deeper into this story. Have you ever been in a situation where someone in authority completely dismissed your ideas or contributions, maybe at work or school? It's one of those experiences that really sticks with you, isn't it? Sarah cleared her throat softly and gestured toward the display. Commander Richards, I've identified a significant pattern in the attack data that suggests we should consider an alternate route for today's convoy. The timing of previous incidents indicates potential inside information being used against our supply lines. Richards stepped forward abruptly, his shoulder slamming into Sarah's as he shoved her away from the tactical display. She stumbled backward, catching herself against the briefing table as murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. The commander planted himself directly in front of the holographic map, blocking her view entirely. Nobody asked for your opinion, Lieutenant, Richards snapped, his voice carrying across the silent room. This briefing is for field commanders, not junior officers who think they can play intelligence analyst. The route through Devil's Canyon has been approved by Division Command, and that's final. Captain Morrison, who had been listening intently to Sarah's analysis, took a half step forward. Sir, the lieutenant was presenting some compelling data about attack patterns that might be relevant to today's mission planning. Richards whipped around to face Morrison, his face flushing red with anger. Are you questioning my authority, Captain? The route is set. We don't have time for every junior officer to present their theories about convoy security. Miss Chun here needs to learn her place in the chain of command. Sarah straightened herself, maintaining her composure despite the public humiliation. The tactical display continued showing the convoy route through Devil's Canyon, the red warning indicators blinking steadily where previous attacks had occurred. Her analysis remained on the secondary screen, ignored and dismissed without consideration. The other officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Major Thompson shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Lieutenant Brooks looked down at his notes, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, but nobody dared challenge the commander's obvious abuse of authority. Richards turned back to the display, dismissing Sarah entirely as he began outlining the convoy schedule. Departure is at 0800 hours. Standard escort protocol applies. Alpha Team takes point, Bravo Team covers the rear. Any questions about the actual mission? Not amateur hour speculation? Sarah remained standing at the back of the room, her carefully prepared intelligence analysis reduced to irrelevant background noise. She had spent hours correlating attack times with convoy departure schedules, identifying a leak that could cost lives. But Commander Richards had made it clear that her expertise meant nothing in his briefing room. The meeting continued for another 15 minutes, with Richards laying out logistics and assignments while Sarah's warning about the security breach went unheard. When he finally dismissed the group, officers filed out quietly, some casting sympathetic glances in Sarah's direction, but none willing to contradict their commanding officer publicly. As the room emptied, Sarah gathered her materials slowly, her analysis still glowing on the secondary display screen. The data was solid. The pattern was unmistakable. But in Commander Richard's military, competence mattered less than knowing your place in his rigid hierarchy of respect. Sarah Chun walked across the base compound, her boots crunching on the gravel path between buildings. The morning sun cast long shadows from the communications towers that dominated the landscape of Forward Operating Base Phoenix. She had been stationed here for 3 weeks, assigned as a military intelligence liaison after completing advanced analysis training at Fort Huachuca. Her background was exactly what the base needed, though Commander Richards seemed determined to ignore that fact. Sarah had graduated top of her class from the Defense Intelligence Analysis course, specializing in pattern recognition and threat assessment. Before her assignment to Phoenix, she had successfully identified insurgent networks in 2 other theaters of operation, saving countless lives through her detailed intelligence work. Captain Morrison caught up with her near the motor pool, his expression troubled. "Chun, hold up a minute." He glanced around to make sure they were alone before continuing. "That was completely out of line back there. Your analysis about the convoy timing was spot on." Sarah slowed her pace, but kept walking. The captain fell in a step beside her, his voice low and careful. She appreciated his support, but they both knew the delicate position it put him in. Speaking against Commander Richards openly could damage Morrison's career, and Sarah didn't want to be responsible for that. "I've seen this pattern before," Morrison continued. "Richards has a problem with officers who challenge his authority, especially when they're right about something he missed. The man's got an ego the size of Texas and twice as fragile." They passed a group of enlisted personnel working on vehicle maintenance. Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from under the hood of a Humvee and nodded respectfully at Sarah. Word had already spread among the lower ranks that the new intelligence officer knew her business. The enlisted soldiers had quickly recognized her competence, even if their commanding officer refused to see it. Sarah's assignment to Forward Operating Base Phoenix had come with specific orders to analyze regional threat patterns and provide actionable intelligence for convoy operations. Her first week on base, she had identified a weapons cache that led to the arrest of 5 insurgent operatives. Her second week, she had correctly predicted an attack on a patrol route, allowing forces to avoid the ambush entirely. But Commander Richards treated her like an unwelcome intrusion rather than a valuable asset. He had made it clear from her first day that he considered intelligence officers to be glorified clerks who should stay in their offices and compile reports. The idea that a lieutenant might have insights worth considering during tactical planning seemed to offend his sensibilities. Morrison stopped walking as they reached the communications building. "Listen, Chun, I want you to know that some of us actually read your reports. That analysis you did on the weapons trafficking routes was brilliant. We've interdicted 3 shipments based on your predictions." Sarah nodded her thanks, but kept her expression neutral. She had learned early in her military career that competence could be as much a liability as an asset, depending on who held authority over you. Commander Richards represented the worst kind of military leadership, the type who confused rank with wisdom and authority with intelligence. Inside the communications building, staff were monitoring radio traffic from the convoy that had departed an hour earlier. Despite her warnings about potential security breaches, the supply vehicles had proceeded through Devil's Canyon on schedule. Sarah hoped her analysis was wrong, but the data had been too clear to ignore. Lieutenant Brooks was manning one of the radio stations, his headset crackling with periodic updates from the convoy escort teams. The young officer looked nervous, frequently checking his watch and adjusting the radio frequency. Sarah noticed his tension and wondered if he shared her concerns about the mission. The base operated with a constant undercurrent of stress that came from being positioned in hostile territory. Every patrol, every convoy, every routine mission carried the potential for violence. In that environment, good intelligence could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah's job was to provide that intelligence, but she couldn't do it effectively if the commanding officer refused to listen. Major Thompson entered the communications center, his face grim as he approached the radio stations. He had been one of the officers in the briefing room who witnessed Commander Richard's treatment of Sarah. The major had 20 years of experience and had seen enough incompetent leadership to recognize it when it appeared. "Any word from the convoy, Brooks?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying an edge of concern that Sarah found telling. The major was worried about the mission, probably for the same reasons that had prompted her analysis in the first place. "All quiet so far, sir," Brooks replied, "but they're approaching the narrowest section of the canyon now. If anything's going to happen, it'll be in the next 10 minutes. Sarah stood near the back of the room, officially present, but effectively sidelined by Commander Richard's dismissal of her expertise. She watched the radio operators and listened to the periodic status updates, hoping desperately that her pattern analysis had been incorrect. But deep in her gut, she knew that somewhere in Devil's Canyon, the convoy was walking into exactly the kind of trap she had tried to warn them about. Sarah returned to her office in the intelligence building, a converted shipping container that housed 3 desks and enough electronic equipment to monitor communications across the region. The walls were lined with maps marked with colored pins indicating known insurgent activity, weapons caches, and patrol routes. Her workspace occupied the corner nearest the encrypted communication terminal. Despite Commander Richard's public dismissal of her work, Sarah continued analyzing the morning's intelligence reports. 3 new intercepts had arrived overnight from signals intelligence units operating in the mountains. The intercepted communications were fragmentary, but they contained references to timing and locations that fit the pattern she had identified. Specialist Garcia sat at the desk across from her, headphones covering his ears as he monitored radio frequencies used by local insurgent groups. The young soldier had been working intelligence for 18 months and had developed a good ear for the subtle changes in communication patterns that often preceded attacks. He looked up from his equipment and caught Sarah's attention. "Ma'am, I'm picking up increased chatter on the secondary frequencies," Garcia reported quietly. "Nothing specific, but the volume is definitely higher than normal for this time of day." Sarah nodded and made a note in her analysis log. Increased communications activity often indicated operational planning or coordination between insurgent cells. Combined with the convoy timing pattern she had identified, the elevated chatter suggested her concerns about today's mission had been justified. The intelligence office operated independently from the tactical command structure, which meant Sarah could continue her work regardless of Commander Richard's opinion of her capabilities. Her orders came directly from Division Intelligence, and those orders were clear about her responsibilities for threat assessment and pattern analysis. She pulled up the digital map display showing real-time locations of all friendly forces in the area. The convoy appeared as a series of blue dots moving slowly through Devil's Canyon, approximately halfway through the most dangerous section of the route. So far, no emergency signals have been transmitted, but Sarah knew that attacks often happened too quickly for radio warnings. Sergeant First Class Williams entered the office carrying a stack of overnight intelligence summaries from Regional Command. The veteran non-commissioned officer had been running intelligence operations at Forward Operating Base Phoenix for 2 years and had seen 3 different commanding officers rotate through the position. He understood the politics of military hierarchy better than most. "Morning, Lieutenant," Williams said as he distributed the reports. "Heard you had an interesting briefing with the commander today." Sarah looked up from her computer screen. "News travels fast on a small base, Sergeant." Williams chuckled grimly. "When a commanding officer gets physical with one of his officers in front of a room full of witnesses, word tends to spread pretty quickly. Some of the enlisted personnel are talking about filing witness statements if anything comes of it." The sergeant's comments surprised Sarah. She hadn't considered that the enlisted soldiers might view Commander Richard's behavior as seriously as she did. Military regulations were clear about appropriate conduct between officers, and physical contact during disagreements crossed several lines that could result in formal disciplinary action. Garcia removed his headphones and turned toward them both. "Ma'am, I think you should hear this. I've got 3 different insurgent cells, all going radio silent at the same time. That usually means they're switching to backup communication methods for an operation." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Radio silence among multiple insurgent groups was one of the strongest indicators of imminent coordinated action. Combined with the convoy's current position in Devil's Canyon, the timing was extremely concerning. She reached for the secure telephone to contact the Tactical Operations Center. The call connected after 2 rings, and Lieutenant Brooks answered. "This is TOC, Brooks speaking." "Brooks, this is Chun in Intelligence. I need to speak with Major Thompson immediately about the convoy situation." "Stand by," Brooks replied, and Sarah heard him calling for the Major over the background noise of the Operations Center. Major Thompson's voice came on the line moments later. "What do you have, Chun?" "Sir, we're seeing coordinated radio silence among multiple insurgent cells in the convoy's operational area. This typically precedes planned attacks. I recommend immediate contact with the convoy commander to advise heightened alert status." Thompson was quiet for several seconds before responding. "I'll pass your recommendation to Commander Richards. He's the tactical commander for today's operations." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew exactly how Commander Richards would respond to any recommendation that came from her, regardless of how critical the intelligence might be. The formal chain of command would require Major Thompson to present her analysis to the commanding officer, but Richards had already demonstrated his willingness to ignore her expertise. "Understood, sir," Sarah replied, though she felt the familiar frustration of being trapped by military protocol. "Is there any way to contact the convoy directly with a general alert advisory?" "Negative," Thompson answered. "All tactical communications go through the commanding officer. I'll make sure he gets your assessment immediately." The call ended, leaving Sarah staring at the secure telephone in her hand. Specialist Garcia was still monitoring the radio frequencies, his expression growing more concerned as the minutes passed. Sergeant Williams stood near the map display, studying the convoy's position with the experienced eye of someone who had seen too many missions go wrong. Garcia suddenly straightened in his chair, pressing his headphones tighter against his ears. "Ma'am, I'm getting fragmentary transmissions that sound like countdown sequences. Multiple sources, all in the same general area as the convoy route." Sarah grabbed her radio and switched to the emergency frequency used for urgent intelligence alerts. Even if Commander Richards refused to listen to her analysis, she had a duty to report immediate threats through proper channels. The lives of the convoy personnel were more important than military politics or her commanding officer's wounded ego. The emergency radio crackled to life with urgent transmissions from Devil's Canyon. "Contact, contact, contact. Convoy taking fire from multiple positions. We have casualties and need immediate support." Sarah's heart sank as the reports confirmed her worst fears. The pattern analysis had been correct, but Commander Richards' dismissal of her intelligence had cost lives. She grabbed her incident log and began documenting the attack details for the post-mission analysis that would inevitably follow. In the Tactical Operations Center, chaos erupted as officers scrambled to coordinate rescue operations. Major Thompson was shouting orders for close air support, while Lieutenant Brooks frantically worked the radio frequencies to establish contact with nearby patrol units. The convoy was pinned down in the narrowest section of the canyon, with wounded personnel and damaged vehicles. Commander Richards stormed into the intelligence office 15 minutes after the attack began, his face red with fury and embarrassment. His carefully planned mission had turned into a disaster, and he was looking for someone to blame other than his own poor decision-making. "Chun," Richards barked, pointing an accusatory finger at Sarah. "Your job is to provide accurate intelligence, not create panic with wild theories. If you had real information about threats to that convoy, you should have presented it properly through channels." Sarah stood at attention, her jaw clenched with controlled anger. "Sir, I did present the intelligence through proper channels. The attack pattern analysis was provided during this morning's briefing, and I submitted follow-up warnings through Major Thompson when additional indicators emerged. Don't lecture me about proper procedures, Lieutenant." Richards stepped closer, invading her personal space in an obvious attempt at intimidation. "Your analysis was speculative at best. Real intelligence officers deal with facts, not hunches based on coincidental timing. Sergeant Williams witnessed the confrontation from his position near the communications equipment. The experienced non-commissioned officer had seen enough incompetent leadership to recognize when a commanding officer was deflecting blame for his own failures. The entire intelligence section could hear every word of the heated exchange. "Sir, the pattern correlation showed a 93% probability of coordinated attack activity," Sarah replied, maintaining her professional composure despite Richard's aggressive posture. The timing analysis included 17 separate data points indicating insurgent operational planning synchronized with convoy schedules. Richards grabbed a stack of intelligence reports from Sarah's desk and threw them to the floor, scattering papers across the small office. 93% probability means 7% chance you're wrong. That convoy was attacked because you failed to provide actionable intelligence about specific threats. The accusation was completely backward, and everyone in the room knew it. Sarah had provided actionable intelligence that Richards had chosen to ignore. Now he was attempting to rewrite history to protect his own reputation while soldiers were dying in Devil's Canyon because of his poor judgment. Specialist Garcia looked up from his radio monitoring equipment, his young face showing obvious distress at the confrontation. The enlisted soldiers respected Lieutenant Chen's intelligence work and understood that she had tried to prevent exactly the kind of disaster that was now unfolding in the mountains. Commander Richards wasn't finished with his verbal assault. "From now on, Chun, you will submit all intelligence assessments to me personally before they go anywhere else. I'm tired of junior officers creating unnecessary alarm with half-baked analysis that undermines operational confidence." The order was a clear violation of intelligence protocols that required direct reporting channels to division command. Richards was essentially demanding that Sarah filter her intelligence through his approval, which would compromise the independence necessary for accurate threat assessment. "Sir, intelligence reporting protocols require direct submission to division command for all threat assessments," Sarah responded carefully. Filtering intelligence through tactical command could compromise analytical independence and delay critical information. "Are you refusing a direct order, Lieutenant?" Richard stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Because that would be insubordination, and I can have you court-martialed for refusing to follow proper command authority." The threat hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Sarah realized that Commander Richards was willing to destroy her career rather than admit his own mistakes. The attack in Devil's Canyon had exposed his incompetence, and he was desperately trying to shift responsibility onto anyone else available. Major Thompson appeared in the doorway of the intelligence office, his face grim with news from the ongoing rescue operation. "Commander, we need you in the TOC immediately. The convoy commander is requesting emergency evacuation for multiple casualties, and we need to coordinate with medical support aircraft." Richards turned away from Sarah without another word, following Thompson back to the Tactical Operations Center. But his parting glare made it clear that their confrontation was far from over. The commanding officer had identified Sarah as a threat to his authority and reputation, and he intended to neutralize that threat through whatever means necessary. As soon as Richards left the office, Sergeant Williams began collecting the scattered intelligence reports from the floor. "Sir was way out of line there, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "Half the base knows your analysis was solid. The other half will figure out once they see the after-action reports." Sarah sat down at her desk, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. The radio continued broadcasting updates from the canyon, where soldiers were fighting for their lives in an ambush that could have been avoided if Commander Richards had listened to her intelligence assessment. Garcia pulled off his headphones and turned toward her. "Ma'am, what happens now? Do we keep reporting through normal channels or follow the commander's orders about filtering everything through him?" The question highlighted the impossible position Richards had created. Following his orders would violate intelligence protocols and potentially cost more lives. Ignoring his orders would result in court-martial proceedings that could end her military career. Sarah realized that Commander Richards had effectively weaponized the chain of command against her. 3 days after the Devil's Canyon attack, Sarah worked late into the evening analyzing communication intercepts that revealed a disturbing pattern. The insurgent groups weren't just coordinating individual attacks. They were building towards something much larger, a coordinated offensive that could overwhelm the base's defenses if it succeeded. Her specialized training in network analysis allowed her to see connections that others missed. Each intercepted communication was like a single thread in a complex web, meaningless by itself, but revealing intricate patterns when viewed as part of the larger intelligence picture. The insurgent leadership was planning a simultaneous assault on 3 different coalition bases, using the same timing coordination methods that had made the convoy ambush so effective. Specialist Garcia had gone off duty hours earlier, leaving Sarah alone in the intelligence office with her computers and intercept transcripts. The base was quiet except for the occasional patrol returning from night operations. She had discovered that the insurgent network was receiving intelligence from someone with access to operational schedules, but identifying the source required analysis techniques that went beyond standard military intelligence training. Sarah's background included advanced courses in signals intelligence and communications analysis that most field intelligence officers never received. She had spent 6 months at the National Security Agency learning how to trace communication patterns through multiple network layers, identifying command structures, and operational planning through statistical analysis of message timing and frequency. The current intelligence problem required exactly those specialized skills. The insurgent communications weren't following normal patterns that could be analyzed through conventional methods. Instead, they were using a sophisticated system of coded timing and frequency changes that suggested professional training in counterintelligence techniques. Her computer screen displayed a complex matrix showing communication intercepts plotted against time and frequency patterns. To an untrained observer, the data would look like random noise. But Sarah could see the underlying structure that revealed how the insurgent network was organized and how they were receiving their intelligence about coalition operations. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone with access to operational planning was feeding information to the insurgent leadership approximately 6 hours before each mission. The timing was consistent enough to establish a clear intelligence leak, but identifying the specific source would require access to personnel records and communication logs that went beyond her current authorization level. Major Thompson entered the intelligence office, carrying a cup of coffee and looking exhausted from 3 days of damage control following the convoy disaster. He found Sarah hunched over her computer, surrounded by printouts and analysis charts that covered most of her desk surface. "Chun, what are you still doing here? It's past midnight, and you've been working since dawn," Thompson said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Sir, I've identified something that requires immediate attention," Sarah replied, turning her monitor so the Major could see the communication analysis. The convoy attack wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger operational plan targeting multiple coalition bases simultaneously. Thompson leaned forward to study the data display, his tired expression sharpening as he began to understand the implications of Sarah's analysis. The matrix showed clear patterns of coordination between insurgent groups that had previously been considered independent operations. "How confident are you in this assessment?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that intelligence failures cost lives. "Extremely confident, sir. The statistical correlation is too strong to be coincidental," Sarah replied, highlighting specific data points on the screen. "More importantly, I've identified the probable method they're using to obtain intelligence about our operations. There's a leak somewhere in our planning process." Thompson studied the analysis for several minutes, asking technical questions that demonstrated his respect for Sarah's expertise. Unlike Commander Richards, the Major understood that good intelligence required specialists with advanced training and analytical skills that went beyond basic military education. "This is excellent work, Chun, but it's also way above my clearance level," Thompson admitted. "You need to brief this to someone with the authority to act on intelligence about operational security breaches. That means going above base level to regional command." Sarah had reached the same conclusion, but she also knew that any intelligence briefing would have to go through Commander Richards first. The commanding officer had made it clear that he intended to control all intelligence reporting, which meant her analysis would likely be buried or dismissed before it reached anyone with the authority to investigate. "Sir, Commander Richards has ordered all intelligence assessments to be filtered through his approval before submission to higher command," Sarah said carefully. "Given his previous response to my analysis, I'm concerned that this information might not reach the appropriate level for action." Thompson's expression darkened. He was aware of the conflict between Sarah and Commander Richards, but he hadn't realized the extent to which the commanding officer was interfering with normal intelligence procedures. The major understood that compromising intelligence reporting could have consequences far beyond their small base. "That's not how intelligence protocols work, and Richards knows it," Thompson said grimly. "Intelligence officers have direct reporting responsibility to Division Command, specifically to prevent tactical commanders from suppressing information that might contradict their operational preferences." The major stood up and began pacing the small office, clearly wrestling with the implications of what Sarah had discovered. Her analysis revealed not just an insurgent threat, but also evidence that Commander Richards was violating fundamental intelligence procedures that existed to protect operational security. "Chun, I want you to prepare a formal briefing package with your complete analysis," Thompson instructed. "Include everything about the communication patterns, the timing correlations, and your assessment of the intelligence leak. Make copies of all supporting data and secure them according to classification protocols." Sarah nodded, understanding that Major Thompson was preparing to take the intelligence analysis directly to Regional Command, bypassing Commander Richards entirely. It was a risky decision that could end Thompson's career if Richards decided to make it a formal disciplinary matter, but the major was choosing operational security over political safety. "Sir, what about Commander Richards' order regarding intelligence reporting?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes following proper procedures requires ignoring improper orders," Thompson replied with a grim smile. "The lives of coalition personnel are more important than one commanding officer's ego or career prospects." Major Thompson left the intelligence office at 0100 hours, carrying Sarah's classified analysis in a sealed envelope marked for immediate transmission to Regional Command. The secure communication would bypass normal base channels, going directly through encrypted satellite links that Commander Richards couldn't monitor or intercept. Sarah remained at her desk, continuing to refine her analysis as new intercepts arrived throughout the night. The insurgent communication patterns were accelerating, suggesting that whatever operation they were planning was moving into its final preparation phase. Time was running short to prevent what could be a devastating coordinated attack. The base communication center operated 24 hours a day, staffed by specialists trained in handling classified transmissions between field units and higher command structures. Major Thompson's priority message would reach Regional Command within minutes, but the response and any resulting action orders might take hours to filter back down through official channels. At 0300 hours, Sergeant Williams arrived for his early shift, finding Sarah still working at her computer station. The veteran non-commissioned officer had seen enough intelligence operations to recognize when something significant was developing, and Sarah's extended work schedule suggested a major threat assessment was in progress. "Morning, Lieutenant. Any developments overnight?" Williams asked, settling at his desk and beginning the routine process of checking overnight message traffic from regional intelligence networks. "Significant patterns emerging, Sergeant. Major Thompson has initiated priority communication with Regional Command regarding a potential coordinated threat to multiple coalition bases," Sarah replied, without looking up from her analysis display. Williams understood the implications immediately. Priority communications to Regional Command meant that intelligence had been developed that exceeded the authority level of base command to handle independently. It also meant that Major Thompson was taking considerable personal risk by bypassing Commander Richards in the reporting chain. The morning briefing was scheduled for 0700 hours, which gave them approximately 4 hours before Commander Richards would discover that his control over intelligence reporting had been circumvented. Sarah knew that the commanding officer would view Thompson's action as a direct challenge to his authority, regardless of the operational necessity that had prompted it. Specialist Garcia arrived at 0600 hours to find both Sarah and Sergeant Williams monitoring multiple communication channels for any sign of accelerated insurgent activity. The young soldier quickly recognized the tension in the office and began his monitoring duties with unusual intensity. "Ma'am, I'm seeing increased message traffic on the primary insurgent frequencies," Garcia reported after 30 minutes of careful listening. "The volume is definitely higher than normal for early morning hours, and I'm detecting multiple new call signs that haven't appeared in previous intercepts." Sarah made notes in her analysis log, while continuing to track the communication patterns that had emerged during the night. The insurgent network was clearly in an advanced state of operational preparation, with coordination activities that suggested imminent action against coalition targets. At 0645, Lieutenant Brooks entered the intelligence office looking unusually serious. "Major Thompson wants to see you in his office immediately, Lieutenant Chun. He said to bring all your analysis materials and any overnight updates." Sarah gathered her classified files and headed across the base compound to Major Thompson's office in the Tactical Command Building. The early morning air was cool and quiet, with only essential personnel moving between buildings. In 15 minutes, the normal daily routine would begin with reveille and morning formation. Major Thompson's office was located next to the Tactical Operations Center, giving him immediate access to communication equipment and situation displays. When Sarah arrived, she found the major reviewing message traffic from Regional Command with an expression that mixed satisfaction with concern. "Chun, your analysis package has generated significant interest at Regional Command," Thompson began without preamble. "They're sending a team of investigators to examine the intelligence leak you identified, and they're also deploying additional security assets to the bases you flagged as potential targets." The news was encouraging from an operational standpoint, but Sarah understood that it also meant Commander Richards would soon discover that his authority had been bypassed. Regional Command involvement would generate paperwork and activity that couldn't be hidden from the base commanding officer. "Sir, what's the timeline for the investigative team arrival?" Sarah asked, knowing that timing would be critical for what was likely to become a confrontation between different levels of military authority. "They're flying in this afternoon with a full communications analysis package and authorization to review all base personnel records," Thompson replied. "Regional Command is treating this as a potential major security breach that could affect coalition operations across the entire theater." The implications were serious enough to warrant immediate investigation, but they also meant that forward operating Base Phoenix would soon be under intense scrutiny from higher command levels. Commander Richards would be forced to explain his interference with intelligence reporting procedures to officers who outranked him significantly. Major Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the fatigue of someone who had spent the night making difficult decisions. "Chun, I want you to understand that what happens next might not be pleasant. Richards is going to be furious when he discovers that Regional Command is investigating his base without his prior knowledge." Sarah nodded, understanding that she was likely to become the focal point of Commander Richards' anger when he learned about the investigation. The commanding officer had already demonstrated his willingness to abuse his authority to silence intelligence officers who challenged his decisions. "Sir, I'm prepared for whatever consequences follow from proper intelligence reporting," Sarah replied. "The operational security of coalition forces is more important than any personal considerations." Thompson studied her for a moment before continuing. "The investigative team includes a full colonel with authority to review command decisions and personnel actions. If Richards has been interfering with intelligence procedures, there will be consequences that go far beyond this base." The morning reveille sounded across the base compound, marking the beginning of another day that would prove far more eventful than the routine military schedule suggested. In a few hours, Commander Richards would discover that his attempts to control intelligence reporting had triggered an investigation that could end his military career. Commander Richards discovered Major Thompson's communication to Regional Command at 0900 hours when his administrative assistant brought him the overnight message summary. The commanding officer's face turned pale as he read the notification that a priority intelligence assessment had been transmitted directly to higher command without his knowledge or approval. Sarah was in the middle of briefing Specialist Garcia on updated intercept priorities when Commander Richards burst into the intelligence office like a man possessed. His uniform was wrinkled and his face was flushed with rage that had been building for the past 30 minutes since he learned about the breach of his authority. "Chun!" Richard shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls of the converted shipping container. "Get over here right now." Sarah stood from her desk and approached the commanding officer, maintaining her military bearing despite the obvious hostility radiating from Richards. Sergeant Williams and Specialist Garcia watched nervously as the confrontation began, both understanding that they were witnessing something that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. "Did you go behind my back to Regional Command?" Richards demanded, stepping so close to Sarah that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I gave you a direct order about intelligence reporting procedures, and you violated that order by circumventing proper channels." "Sir, all intelligence reporting followed established protocols for threat assessment and operational security," Sarah replied calmly. "Military intelligence regulations require direct reporting channels to Division Command for matters involving potential security breaches. Don't quote regulations to me, Lieutenant." Richards grabbed Sarah by the shoulder and shoved her backward against the wall of filing cabinets. "I am the commanding officer of this base, and every piece of intelligence goes through me before it goes anywhere else." The physical contact crossed a clear line that separated legitimate command authority from assault. Sergeant Williams stood up from his desk, his face showing alarm at the escalation of the confrontation. Specialist Garcia reached for his radio, understanding that the situation was spiraling beyond normal disciplinary procedures. Richards wasn't finished with his verbal and physical assault. "You think you're smarter than everyone else, don't you, Chun? You think your fancy training gives you the right to ignore direct orders from your commanding officer." He shoved Sarah again, harder this time, causing her to stumble against the communications equipment. The impact knocked several intelligence reports to the floor and sent a coffee cup crashing into the wall. The commanding officer was completely out of control, his anger overriding any consideration of military discipline or appropriate conduct. "Sir, you need to step back and calm down," Sergeant Williams said firmly, moving toward the confrontation. "This situation is being handled inappropriately, and there are proper procedures for addressing disagreements about intelligence reporting." Richards whipped around to face the sergeant, his eyes wild with fury. "Are you telling me how to command my own base, Sergeant? Because that sounds like insubordination to me." The accusation was absurd, but it demonstrated how far Commander Richards had descended into paranoid authoritarianism. He was treating any challenge to his absolute control as a personal attack that justified increasingly extreme responses. The commanding officer had lost all perspective about appropriate leadership behavior. Sarah straightened herself and faced Richards directly, her voice steady despite the physical intimidation. "Sir, Regional Command has been notified about patterns of insurgent activity that pose a threat to coalition operations. The intelligence assessment was submitted through proper channels according to established military protocols." Richards grabbed Sarah by both shoulders and slammed her against the wall with enough force to rattle the entire filing cabinet system. "You cost me my reputation with higher command. Your insubordination has made me look incompetent in front of officers who determine promotion and assignment decisions." The admission revealed the true source of Richard's rage. He wasn't concerned about operational security or proper procedures. He was angry that his incompetence had been exposed to superiors who would evaluate his performance and leadership capabilities. Sarah's accurate intelligence had highlighted his poor judgment, and he was determined to destroy her career in retaliation. Specialist Garcia was speaking urgently into his radio, calling for military police assistance to respond to what had clearly become an assault situation. The young soldier understood that he was witnessing conduct that violated multiple articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and required immediate intervention by appropriate authorities. Commander Richards. Major Thompson's voice cut through the chaos as he entered the intelligence office with two military police officers. Step away from Lieutenant Chun immediately. Richards released his grip on Sarah's shoulders, but didn't step back, his face still twisted with rage. Thompson, you're responsible for this betrayal of proper command authority. Your career is finished when I report your insubordination to Regional Command. Actually, Commander, my reporting to Regional Command has already been reviewed and approved by officers who outrank both of us, Thompson replied grimly. And right now, you're under investigation for interference with intelligence procedures and assault on a subordinate officer. The military police officers moved to flank Commander Richards, their presence making it clear that the situation had escalated beyond internal base discipline. One of them was already documenting the scene with photographs, while the other prepared to take witness statements from everyone present. Richards looked around the room, finally beginning to understand that his abuse of authority had triggered consequences that extended far beyond his control over Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The investigation he had tried to prevent was now examining his own conduct as well as the intelligence leak that Sarah had identified. Within an hour of the confrontation in the intelligence office, word of Commander Richards' assault on Lieutenant Chun had spread throughout Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Military bases operate on information networks that move faster than official communication channels, and news of a commanding officer physically attacking a subordinate traveled through every building and work detail on a compound. Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to approach Major Thompson after the military police had escorted Commander Richards to the base detention facility for processing. The veteran mechanic represented a group of enlisted personnel who had witnessed Richards' pattern of inappropriate behavior over the past several weeks. "Sir, we need to talk about what's been happening with the commander," Rodriguez said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "A lot of us have seen things that probably should be documented if there's going to be an official investigation." Thompson understood that the enlisted soldiers had observed incidents that officers might have missed or ignored. The lower ranks often had the clearest view of leadership failures because they bore the direct consequences of poor command decisions. Their willingness to come forward indicated that Richard's problems extended far beyond his treatment of Sarah. In the communications center, Staff Sergeant Monroe was fielding calls from other bases in the region where news of the incident had already arrived through unofficial channels. The military community was small enough that controversial events spread quickly, especially when they involved violations of fundamental leadership principles. Lieutenant Brooks was monitoring radio traffic when he received a priority message from Regional Command requesting immediate updates on the status of base operations. Higher Command wanted assurance that Forward Operating Base Phoenix remained operationally effective despite the command structure disruption caused by Richard's removal. The base executive officer, Captain Martinez, had assumed temporary command responsibilities following Richard's detention. Martinez was a logistics specialist without tactical command experience, but he understood the importance of maintaining operational continuity while higher command sorted out the leadership situation. Sarah remained in the intelligence office, continuing her analysis work despite the morning's traumatic events. The insurgent threat hadn't disappeared because of the command crisis, and her responsibility for protecting coalition forces required her to maintain focus on the operational mission regardless of personal circumstances. Specialist Garcia approached her desk cautiously, still processing what he had witnessed during the confrontation. "Ma'am, are you okay? That was pretty intense back there." "I'm fine, Garcia. We need to keep monitoring the intercept traffic and maintain our analysis schedule," Sarah replied, though her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the physical assault. Sergeant Williams was documenting the entire incident in his official log, creating a detailed record that would become part of the investigation file. The experienced, non-commissioned officer understood that proper documentation was essential for ensuring accountability and preventing similar incidents in the future. By noon, personnel from other units were arriving at Forward Operating Base Phoenix to provide support during the command transition. Regional Command was taking no chances with operational continuity while the investigation proceeded and replacement leadership was identified. Captain Morrison found Sarah during lunch break, his expression mixing concern with professional respect. "Chun, I want you to know that every officer on this base recognizes what Richards did was completely out of line. Your intelligence work has been outstanding, and his treatment of you was inexcusable." The support from fellow officers was encouraging, but Sarah understood that the formal investigation process would be lengthy and potentially difficult. Military justice proceedings required extensive documentation and witness testimony that could take weeks or months to complete. Major Thompson returned to the intelligence office in the early afternoon with updates from his conversations with Regional Command. The investigative team had been expanded to include specialists in command climate assessment and personnel conduct evaluation, indicating that Richard's problems were being treated as systemic rather than isolated incidents. "Chun, I've been authorized to tell you that Regional Command is extremely impressed with your intelligence analysis," Thompson said. "They're also very concerned about the interference with reporting procedures that delayed critical threat assessment information." The validation of her work was gratifying, but Sarah remained focused on the operational implications of the intelligence she had developed. The insurgent threat was still developing, and preventing the coordinated attacks required continued analysis and rapid response to new intelligence indicators. Lieutenant Brooks entered the office carrying a classified message from Regional Command addressed specifically to Sarah. The unusual direct communication indicated that higher command was taking her intelligence assessment seriously enough to bypass normal base-level channels entirely. "Ma'am, this came in on the Priority Intelligence Channel," Brooks said, handing her the sealed envelope. Regional Command requested immediate acknowledgement of receipt and asked for any updates to your threat assessment analysis. Sarah opened the message and found authorization to submit intelligence reports directly to Regional Command without intermediate approval, along with a request for expanded analysis of the insurgent network structure. The communication effectively removed any remaining obstacles to her intelligence reporting responsibilities. The afternoon shift change brought new personnel into the intelligence office, including specialists from Regional Command who had arrived to support the expanded threat assessment mission. Sarah briefed them on her analysis while continuing to monitor the communication patterns that indicated the insurgent offensive was still in preparation. Word of the morning's events had reached every corner of the base by evening formation. The removal of Commander Richards and the ongoing investigation had created an atmosphere of uncertainty, but had also demonstrated that military justice systems could respond effectively to leadership failures when they were properly documented and reported. As darkness fell over Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Sarah realized that the confrontation with Commander Richards had fundamentally changed her position within the military hierarchy. Her intelligence expertise was now recognized and protected by higher command, but the price of that recognition had been a traumatic demonstration of how badly military leadership could fail when personal ego overcame professional responsibility. The morning of the fourth day brought unusual activity to Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Multiple aircraft had been detected on approach vectors that suggested high-ranking visitors were en route to the base. Air traffic control reported a formation of helicopters requesting priority landing clearance, with passenger manifests that remained classified above base-level authorization. Sarah was reviewing overnight intelligence intercepts when Specialist Garcia noticed the increased radio chatter on command frequencies normally reserved for senior officer communications. The volume and encryption level of the transmissions indicated that something significant was developing, though the specific details remained beyond their clearance level to access. Captain Martinez, still serving as acting base commander, received a priority communication at 0700 hours instructing him to prepare for an unscheduled inspection by senior command personnel. The message provided no details about the purpose or scope of the visit, only orders to ensure that all base operations were ready for immediate review. Major Thompson found Sarah in the intelligence office and informed her that she should prepare for a comprehensive briefing on her threat assessment analysis. Regional Command had specifically requested that Lieutenant Chun be available to present her findings directly to the visiting senior officers, bypassing normal presentation protocols that would typically filter intelligence through multiple command levels. The base motor pool received orders to prepare transportation for a party of senior officers, with instructions to have vehicles standing by at the landing zone for immediate deployment upon arrival. The security detail was expanded and briefed on protocols for protecting visiting general officers, though their specific identities remained classified. By mid-morning, personnel throughout Forward Operating Base Phoenix were aware that something unprecedented was occurring. The level of preparation activity and security measures indicated that visitors of unusual importance were expected, but speculation about their purpose remained largely confined to whispered conversations between trusted colleagues. Sarah spent the morning organizing her intelligence files and preparing visual aids for what she anticipated would be a detailed briefing on the insurgent network analysis. The communication patterns she had identified continued to show escalating activity, suggesting that the coordinated attacks were still in planning stages and could potentially be prevented if appropriate countermeasures were implemented quickly. Sergeant Williams assisted with the briefing preparation while monitoring radio frequencies for any indication of the visitor's estimated arrival time. The veteran non-commissioned officer had served long enough to recognize when senior command was responding to serious problems that required immediate high-level attention. At 1100 hours, Air Traffic Control reported contact with the approaching aircraft formation. Four helicopters were inbound from Regional Command Headquarters, carrying personnel whose arrival had been coordinated at levels far above Forward Operating Base Phoenix Command Authority. Captain Martinez assembled his staff for a quick briefing on protocols for receiving senior visitors. The acting commander emphasized that all personnel should be prepared to answer questions about their duties and responsibilities, particularly regarding recent events that had resulted in Commander Richards' removal from command. Lieutenant Brooks was assigned to coordinate communication support for the visiting party, ensuring that secure communication links were available for any discussions that required encryption beyond base-level capabilities. The communication center was configured to handle multiple simultaneous classified conversations without interference or security compromise. The base security perimeter was expanded and reinforced with additional checkpoints designed to protect high-ranking visitors from potential insurgent activity. Intelligence reports indicated that insurgent groups were aware of increased coalition activity in the region, though they appeared unaware of the specific reasons for the heightened security measures. Sarah reviewed her analysis one final time, focusing on the key findings that had triggered Regional Command's interest in the intelligence leak investigation. The evidence of coordinated insurgent planning remained strong, and her recommendations for countermeasures have been refined based on additional intercepts collected over the past several days. At 11:30 hours, the sound of approaching helicopters became audible across the base compound. Personnel not directly involved in the arrival preparations were ordered to remain at their duty stations and continue normal operations unless specifically summoned for briefings or interviews. Major Thompson joined Sarah in the intelligence office as the aircraft noise grew louder. Chun, I want you to understand that what happens in the next few hours could significantly impact your military career. The level of command attention your analysis has generated is unprecedented for a lieutenant's intelligence assessment. Sarah nodded, understanding that the arrival of senior officers represented both an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities and a potential risk if the briefing didn't meet their expectations. The intelligence she had developed was solid, but presenting complex analysis to general officers required communication skills that went beyond technical competence. The helicopters could be seen approaching the landing zone, their formation indicating military precision and the importance of their mission. Ground crews were already in position to assist with the arrival procedures, and security personnel had established a protective perimeter around the entire landing area. Specialist Garcia monitored the radio frequencies as the aircraft prepared for landing, noting that multiple bases in the region were reporting similar high-level visits occurring simultaneously. The scope of the command response suggested that Sarah's intelligence assessment had triggered a theater-wide investigation into insurgent activity and security procedures. As the first helicopter touched down on the landing zone, Sarah gathered her briefing materials and prepared for what would likely be the most important presentation of her military career. The analysis that had begun with pattern recognition and communication intercepts was about to be evaluated by officers with the authority to implement major changes in coalition operations and security procedures. The arrival of senior command represented validation of her intelligence work, but it also marked the beginning of a process that would determine whether her analysis could prevent the coordinated insurgent attacks that continued to develop in the mountains surrounding Forward Operating Base Phoenix and other coalition installations throughout the region. The first helicopter settled onto the landing zone with military precision. Its rotor washed kicking up clouds of dust that obscured the passengers until the engines wound down. When the dust cleared, Sarah could see 4 figures in naval uniforms disembarking from the aircraft, their shoulder boards gleaming with the 4 stars of full Admirals. Captain Martinez snapped to attention as the senior officers approached, his face pale with the realization that Forward Operating Base Phoenix was receiving a visit from some of the highest-ranking military leaders in the theater of operations. The acting base commander had never briefed officers of this level, and his nervousness was evident to everyone present. Admiral Richardson, the theater intelligence commander, led the group as they moved from the landing zone toward the base headquarters building. His presence alone indicated that Sarah's intelligence analysis had generated interest at the highest levels of military command. The other 3 admirals represented operations, logistics, and personnel command authorities that could implement immediate changes across the entire coalition force structure. Major Thompson met the party at the entrance to the headquarters building, rendering proper military courtesies while directing them toward the briefing room that had been prepared for their visit. The Major's expression showed a mixture of professional pride and concern as he recognized the unprecedented nature of the command attention focused on his base. Admiral Richardson addressed Captain Martinez directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of personnel. "Captain, we're here to investigate serious irregularities in command procedures and intelligence reporting that have come to our attention through regional command channels." The acting base commander struggled to respond appropriately to the senior officer. "Sir, we have prepared comprehensive briefing materials and made all relevant personnel available for interviews as requested by Regional Command. We'll start with Lieutenant Chin's intelligence briefing," Admiral Richardson replied, his tone indicating that the visit's primary purpose was to evaluate Sarah's threat assessment directly. Her analysis has raised concerns that extend far beyond this base's operational area. Sarah was escorted to the briefing room, where the 4 admirals had arranged themselves around a conference table equipped with secure communication devices and classified document handling capabilities. The setting was more formal than any briefing she had ever conducted, but her confidence in the analysis helped steady her nerves. Admiral Richardson gestured for Sarah to begin her presentation. "Lieutenant Chun, we've reviewed your preliminary assessment, but we want to hear your complete analysis of the insurgent coordination patterns and the intelligence leak you've identified." Sarah activated the digital display system and began presenting the communication intercept analysis that had started the entire investigation. The data showed clear patterns of coordination between previously independent insurgent groups, with timing that suggested access to coalition operational planning information. The statistical correlation is significant enough to establish coordinated planning activity, Sarah explained, highlighting specific data points on the analysis matrix. More concerning is the consistent 6-hour delay between our operational planning sessions and increased insurgent communication activity. Admiral Hayes, the operations commander, leaned forward as he studied the presented data. "Lieutenant, your analysis suggests that someone with access to operational planning is providing intelligence to insurgent leadership. Do you have recommendations for identifying the source of the leak?" Sarah had anticipated the question and had prepared specific recommendations for counterintelligence procedures that could isolate the source of the information leak. "Yes, sir. I recommend controlled information distribution with unique identifiers for each planning participant, combined with communication monitoring to correlate leak timing with specific personnel access patterns." The four admirals exchanged glances that suggested Sarah's analysis was confirming suspicions they had developed through other intelligence channels. Admiral Richardson made notes while asking technical questions that demonstrated his understanding of the sophisticated analysis techniques Sarah had employed. Admiral Morrison, the personnel commander, addressed the broader implications of the investigation. "Lieutenant Shun, we understand that your intelligence reporting was interfered with by your base commanding officer. Can you describe the specific obstacles you encountered in trying to report this threat assessment?" Sarah carefully described Commander Richards' attempts to control intelligence reporting and his physical assault when she had followed proper procedures for threat assessment communication. The Admiral's expressions grew increasingly serious as she detailed the systematic interference with established intelligence protocols. Admiral Thompson, the logistics commander, was the last to speak. "Lieutenant, your analysis indicates that this security breach could affect multiple coalition bases simultaneously. What's your assessment of the timeline for potential coordinated attacks? Based on the escalating communication patterns, I estimate that insurgent groups are in final preparation phases for coordinated operations," Sarah replied. "The window for preventive action may be limited to days rather than weeks." The briefing continued for nearly an hour, with the admirals asking detailed questions about methodology, confidence levels, and recommended countermeasures. Sarah's responses demonstrated both technical competence and tactical understanding that impressed the senior officers who had extensive experience evaluating intelligence assessments. When the formal briefing concluded, Admiral Richardson addressed Sarah directly. "Lieutenant Shun, your analysis represents exactly the kind of innovative intelligence work that coalition forces need to maintain operational effectiveness against adaptive insurgent networks. Your willingness to follow proper reporting procedures despite command interference demonstrates the professional courage that military intelligence requires." The other admirals nodded agreement, their approval evident in both their expressions and their follow-up questions about Sarah's background and training. The level of command attention focused on her work was unprecedented for a junior officer, but it reflected the critical importance of the threats she had identified. Admiral Hayes stood and addressed the group. "We'll be implementing immediate countermeasures based on Lieutenant Shen's recommendations, and we'll be conducting a thorough investigation of the command climate issues that interfered with proper intelligence reporting procedures." The four admirals prepared to leave the briefing room, but Admiral Richardson paused to address Sarah one final time. "Lieutenant, your analysis may have prevented significant coalition casualties through early identification of coordinated insurgent planning. That kind of intelligence work reflects the highest standards of military professionalism." Admiral Richardson summoned Commander Richards from the base detention facility to the headquarters building for immediate questioning about his interference with intelligence procedures. The disgraced commanding officer arrived under military police escort, his uniform rumpled and his face showing the strain of spending 3 days confined while his career collapsed around him. The four admirals had arranged themselves in the main conference room with formal military precision that left no doubt about the seriousness of the proceedings. Commander Richards was directed to stand at attention before the senior officers, his hands shaking slightly as he realized the full scope of the command attention his actions had generated. "Commander Richards," Admiral Richardson began, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone delivering judgment, "you have been accused of systematically interfering with intelligence reporting procedures, physically assaulting a subordinate officer, and compromising operational security through personal misconduct. How do you respond to these charges?" Richards straightened his shoulders in a futile attempt to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "Sir, I was maintaining proper command authority over intelligence operations at my base." Lieutenant Chun was submitting speculative analysis that could have created unnecessary alarm among coalition forces. The response demonstrated that Richards still didn't understand the gravity of his situation or the quality of the intelligence he had dismissed. Admiral Hayes leaned forward, his expression showing obvious disapproval of the former commanding officer's continued refusal to accept responsibility for his failures. "Commander, Lieutenant Chen's analysis identified a coordinated insurgent threat that has been confirmed through multiple independent intelligence sources," Admiral Hayes stated flatly. "Your interference with her reporting delayed critical threat assessment information that could have prevented coalition casualties." Richard's face flushed as he realized that his dismissal of Sarah's intelligence had been not just wrong, but dangerously incompetent. The evidence of his poor judgment was now being evaluated by 4 admirals who had the authority to end his military career with a single recommendation. Admiral Morrison addressed the broader implications of Richard's conduct. "Commander, we have testimony from multiple witnesses regarding your physical assault on Lieutenant Chun and your systematic attempts to control intelligence reporting in violation of established military protocols. These actions represent fundamental failures of military leadership." The testimony from base personnel had been devastating to Richard's position. Sergeant Williams, Specialist Garcia, and numerous other witnesses had provided detailed accounts of his inappropriate behavior that painted a clear picture of an officer who had abused his authority and compromised operational effectiveness through personal misconduct. Admiral Thompson reviewed the investigation file before addressing Richards directly. "Commander, your actions have necessitated a theater-wide review of intelligence procedures and security protocols. The resources required to address the problems you created could have been used for operational missions that directly support coalition objectives." Richards attempted one final defense of his actions. "Sir, I was following established command procedures for maintaining control over intelligence distribution. Lieutenant Chun was operating outside normal reporting channels without proper authorization." The claim was completely false, and all 4 admirals understood that Richards was lying in a desperate attempt to justify his misconduct. Admiral Richardson's expression showed obvious disgust at the former commanding officer's continued dishonesty in the face of overwhelming evidence. "Commander Richards, you are hereby relieved of command effective immediately," Admiral Richardson announced with formal authority. "You will be transported to Regional Command Headquarters for court-martial proceedings on charges of conduct unbecoming an officer, assault on a subordinate, and interference with intelligence operations." The words hit Richards like physical blows. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, and his future in the military eliminated by his own poor decisions and abuse of authority. The commanding officer who had tried to silence Sarah Chun through intimidation and violence was now facing the consequences of his actions. Admiral Hayes addressed the practical implications of Richard's removal. "Captain Martinez will continue as acting base commander until a permanent replacement is assigned. All intelligence operations will resume normal reporting procedures immediately, with Lieutenant Chen's analysis receiving priority attention from Regional Command." Richards was escorted from the conference room by military police officers who would transport him to Regional Command for processing and confinement pending court-martial. The former commanding officer walked with the defeated posture of someone whose arrogance and incompetence had finally caught up with him. The 4 admirals remained in the conference room to discuss the broader implications of the investigation and the implementation of countermeasures based on Sarah's intelligence analysis. Their conversation focused on systemic improvements that would prevent similar command climate problems in other coalition bases. Admiral Richardson addressed his colleagues about the positive aspects of the investigation. "Despite the command failures, this incident has demonstrated that our intelligence procedures are fundamentally sound when they're allowed to operate without interference. Lieutenant Chen's analysis represents exactly the kind of innovative threat assessment we need." The other admirals agreed that Sarah's intelligence work had prevented a potentially devastating insurgent offensive through early identification of coordination patterns that might have been missed by conventional analysis methods. Her professional courage in following proper reporting procedures despite command intimidation had ultimately protected coalition operations across the theater. Admiral Morrison made notes about personnel policies that could prevent similar situations in the future. We need to ensure that junior officers with specialized expertise have protected reporting channels that can't be compromised by tactical commanders who don't understand intelligence operations. The discussion continued for another hour as the admirals developed implementation plans for the security improvements and command climate changes that would result from the investigation. Their presence at Forward Operating Base Phoenix had been necessary to demonstrate the seriousness with which senior command viewed both the intelligence threat and the leadership failures. When the admirals finally prepared to depart, they made a point of stopping by the intelligence office to personally thank Sarah for her outstanding analysis and professional conduct. The recognition from four-star officers represented the highest level of validation her intelligence work could receive. Admiral Richardson addressed Sarah directly before leaving. Lieutenant Shun, your analysis and your courage in following proper procedures despite command interference have protected coalition forces throughout this theater of operations. That kind of intelligence work and professional integrity represents the best traditions of military service. The Admiral's departure marked the end of a process that had begun with Sarah's pattern recognition in insurgent communications and culminated in the removal of an incompetent commanding officer who had threatened operational security through personal misconduct and abuse of authority. The week following the Admiral's visit brought fundamental changes to Forward Operating Base Phoenix that transformed both the operational climate and Sarah's position within the command structure. Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived as the new permanent base commander, bringing 22 years of experience and a reputation for supporting intelligence operations and maintaining professional command standards. Sarah's first meeting with Colonel Hayes established a completely different relationship between intelligence operations and tactical command. The new commanding officer had reviewed Sarah's threat assessment analysis and understood both its technical sophistication and its operational importance for coalition security throughout the region. Lieutenant Shun, Colonel Hayes began during their initial briefing. Your intelligence work prevented what could have been devastating coordinated attacks on multiple coalition bases. Regional Command has specifically requested that you continue developing this analysis with expanded resources and direct reporting authority. The validation was profound after weeks of having her expertise dismissed and her professional competence questioned by Commander Richards. Colonel Hayes represented the kind of military leadership that understood how to utilize specialized capabilities effectively while maintaining proper command climate and operational focus. Major Thompson had been promoted to executive officer under the new command structure, his decision to bypass Richards' interference with intelligence reporting having been recognized as exactly the kind of professional courage that military leadership required. His career had been enhanced rather than damaged by his willingness to follow proper procedures despite personal risk. The intelligence office had been expanded with additional personnel and equipment to support the broader threat assessment mission that had emerged from Sarah's original analysis. Specialist Garcia had been recommended for advanced intelligence training, and Sergeant Williams had received a commendation for his support of proper intelligence procedures during the command crisis. Sarah's analysis of the insurgent coordination patterns had led to successful interdiction of the planned attacks through coordinated countermeasures implemented across multiple coalition bases. The intelligence network she had identified was disrupted through targeted operations that prevented the synchronized offensive while capturing key insurgent leaders and communication equipment. The source of the intelligence leak had been identified through the counterintelligence procedures Sarah had recommended. A civilian contractor with access to operational planning schedules had been feeding information to insurgent networks in exchange for financial payments. His arrest had closed the security breach that had enabled the coordinated attack planning. Captain Morrison approached Sarah during lunch break to discuss the broader implications of the investigation's success. Chun, what you accomplished here has changed how intelligence operations are supported throughout the theater. Regional Command is using your analysis methods as a model for other bases facing similar coordination threats. The professional recognition was gratifying, but Sarah remained focused on the ongoing intelligence mission that required constant attention to evolving threat patterns. The insurgent networks had adapted to the loss of their intelligence source, but new communication patterns were emerging that suggested continued coordination attempts. Colonel Hayes had implemented weekly intelligence briefings that gave Sarah direct access to present threat assessments to the base leadership team. The new commander understood that effective intelligence required open communication between analytical specialists and tactical decision-makers without the filtering that had characterized Richard's approach. Lieutenant Brooks had been assigned as Sarah's deputy for intelligence operations, giving the analysis team additional capability for monitoring multiple threat indicators simultaneously. The young officer had demonstrated both technical competence and the professional integrity necessary for handling classified threat assessment responsibilities. The base personnel had responded positively to the changes in command climate and operational procedures. The removal of Commander Richards had eliminated a source of tension and uncertainty that had affected morale and operational effectiveness throughout forward operating Base Phoenix. Professional competence was now valued and supported rather than viewed as a threat to command authority. Sarah received official notification that her intelligence analysis had been recognized with a commendation from Theater Command and a recommendation for accelerated promotion consideration. The recognition represented validation of both her technical expertise and her professional courage in following proper procedures despite command interference. Regional Command had established Sarah's analysis methods as standard procedures for identifying coordination patterns among insurgent networks throughout the coalition operational area. Her techniques for correlating communication timing with operational planning schedules were being implemented at intelligence units across multiple bases and regions. The investigation into Commander Richard's conduct had resulted in his court-martial and dismissal from military service for conduct unbecoming an officer and interference with intelligence operations. The proceedings had established clear precedent that command authority couldn't be used to suppress legitimate intelligence, reporting, or intimidate personnel who followed proper procedures. Colonel Hayes addressed the base personnel during the weekly formation, emphasizing the importance of professional competence and proper procedures in maintaining operational effectiveness. The new commander made specific reference to the intelligence success that had prevented insurgent attacks through proper analysis and reporting. As Sarah reviewed the latest intelligence intercepts in her expanded office facility, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed through the simple act of following proper military procedures despite personal pressure to compromise her professional responsibilities. The support of senior command had validated the importance of intelligence expertise in protecting coalition operations. The ongoing mission required continued vigilance and analysis as insurgent networks adapted to the security improvements that had resulted from her threat assessment. But now she operated with the full support of competent military leadership that understood how to utilize specialized capabilities effectively. Thinking back on this whole situation, it really makes you wonder about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing felt risky, but turned out to be exactly what was needed? It's one of those experiences that really shapes how you approach challenges in the future. Sarah's experience at Forward Operating Base Phoenix had demonstrated that military justice systems could respond effectively to leadership failures when proper procedures were followed and professional courage was demonstrated by personnel at all levels of the command structure. The price of professional integrity had been high, but the results had validated the importance of maintaining standards regardless of personal cost.